didn't lose love. You lost the version of yourself you built around someone else. And that not the breakup is what's actually destroying you right now. Nobody tells you that. They hand you ice cream and playlists and say time heals everything. But time doesn't heal anything on its own. Time just passes. What you do inside that time, that's the whole game. And most people lose it. They post. They check the profile. They replay the last conversation at 2 a.m., searching for the exact moment it broke. They perform grief for an audience of people who will forget about it by Thursday. They stay so loud, so relentlessly, desperately loud, that they never hear the one voice that could actually save them, their own. Here's what Seneca wrote over 2,000 years ago, and it hits like cold water. Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Everything is borrowed, only time is truly yours. He wasn't talking about clocks. He was talking about attention. About where you pour yourself when everything else has been taken. Right now, someone is scrolling through their ex's Instagram for the 4th time today. They're not looking for information. They're looking for pain. Because pain, at least, feels like contact. And contact, even the kind that bleeds, feels better than the silence of being alone with what's left. That's not weakness, that's biology. The brain processes social rejection in the same neural pathways as physical injury. You are not being dramatic. You are genuinely hurt. The Stoics knew this. But they also knew something else. They knew that the wound and the infection are two different things. The wound you didn't choose. But what happens next time? Marcus Aurelius lost people. Epictetus was a slave who watched everything he owned get stripped away. Seneca watched political exile dismantle his entire world in a single afternoon. These were not men who read about suffering in books. These were men who built philosophies inside the fire. And every single one of them came to the same conclusion. The man who heals in noise heals nothing. He just drowns the signal. Here's the question nobody is asking you right now. What if this heartbreak isn't the worst thing that's ever happened to you? What if, and stay with this, what if losing this person is the first honest moment you've had in years? That thought feels wrong. Maybe even offensive. Good. That's the feeling you need to sit with. Because somewhere inside the grief, underneath the anger, beneath the obsessive mental replay of every good moment and every red flag you ignored, there is a version of you that has been waiting. Quietly, patiently, with tremendous discipline. A version that stopped being built the moment you started building your whole life around someone else's presence. The Stoics called this hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the command center of the self, and there is only one way it gets weakened. Not by loss, not by rejection, not even by betrayal. It gets weakened by noise. By the kind of noise you make when you refuse to be alone with what you actually feel. This video is not going to tell you how to get over someone fast. It's not going to give you a checklist for moving on. What it's going to do is far more dangerous and far more valuable. It's going to show you exactly how the Stoics turned the most devastating human experience into the single greatest catalyst for self-mastery ever known. 8 rules, not suggestions, not comfort, rules. The kind that hold when everything else collapses. But before we get to rule 1, there's something you need to understand about what heartbreak is actually doing to your identity right now. Something the grief counselors don't mention. Something your friends can't see. The person you were before this relationship, they're not gone, they're buried. And the process of finding them, the actual, terrifying, necessary process, begins not with healing. It begins with a kind of silence most people are too afraid to enter. We're going to enter it together. There's a building inside you. You spent years constructing it. Every shared routine, inside joke, every future you imagined together, those were load-bearing walls. And right now, you're standing in the rubble, convinced the building is gone. But here's what you're missing. The foundation is still there. It was always there. You just stopped being able to see it because you built so much on top of it. So much that wasn't actually yours. And now that the structure has collapsed, now that the noise has stopped, and the future harm planned has been cancelled, without warning what's left, exposed is the truest thing about you. Most people look at that exposed foundation and feel shame. They call it emptiness, they call it being broken. They run from it as fast as they can. The Stoics called it an opportunity. Epictetus, a man who was born into slavery, who owned nothing, who had no control over a single external circumstance of his early life, wrote the most radical sentence in the history of human philosophy. He said, "Some things are within our power, and some things are not. And the moment you truly understand which, nothing can destroy you." Read that again. Nothing can destroy you. Not a breakup, not betrayal, not the specific kind of silent agony that comes from loving someone who chose to leave. But here's where most people misapply Epictetus. They hear focus on what you can control, and they turn it into a productivity hack. They make lists. They hit the gym. They stay busy. And busyness feels like healing because it fills the hours. But filling hours is not the same as rebuilding a self. And this is the Stoic diagnosis that nobody wants to receive. You are not suffering primarily because of what you lost. You are suffering because of what the loss revealed. Somewhere along the way, and this is the part that takes real courage to admit, you handed over the architecture of your identity to someone else. You let their opinion of you become your opinion of yourself. You let their presence fill rooms inside you that you should have been furnishing yourself. That is not a character flaw. That's what love does. That's what it's supposed to do in healthy doses. Vulnerability is not weakness. Connection is not the enemy. But here's the line the Stoics drew with absolute clarity. There is a difference between loving someone and needing them to exist. Think about the person you were before this relationship. Not the highlight reel version, the actual version. The one who had edges and habits and preferences and fears that had nothing to do with another person. The one who knew how to be alone in a room without reaching for a phone. When did you last see that person? Because right now, something is happening in your nervous system that masquerades as grief but is actually something older. Something more fundamental. You are experiencing the withdrawal of an identity that was never fully yours. The grief is real, don't misread this. The love was real. The loss is real. But underneath the grief, there is a specific kind of panic that has nothing to do with the other person at all. It's the panic of not knowing who you are without them. Epictetus would not let you stay comfortable in that panic. He would sit across from you calm, unhurried, with the particular authority of a man who has lost far more than you, and he would ask you one question. What exactly did they take that was ever truly yours? Not the memories, those remain. Not the love you gave that was an expression of your own capacity, and that capacity is intact. Not your values, not your character, not the version of you that existed before the first conversation. What did they actually take? The answer, when you sit with it honestly, is narrower than you think. What's actually missing is the story you were telling yourself about the future, the projected version of your life, the comfort of a plan. And here is the Stoic distinction that changes everything. Plans are not reality. Stories are not identity. The future you imagined was always a fiction. A meaningful one, but a fiction nonetheless. What is real is this moment, this breath, this foundation. And on that foundation, something can be rebuilt. Not the same structure that's gone, and chasing it is the most expensive thing you will ever do with your attention. Something better. Something that belongs entirely to you. But rebuilding requires understanding exactly what destroyed the first structure. Not the breakup, not the other person. Something that was happening long before the end, and that's something we haven't named it yet. But in the next part, we will. Because until you can see it clearly, you will keep building the same walls, on the same cracked ground. What if the relationship didn't end when they left? What if it ended the first time you changed something real about yourself to keep them? Sit with that. Because there was a moment, maybe early, maybe so gradual you didn't notice when you started editing yourself. An opinion you swallowed. A boundary you quietly dissolved. A version of you that felt too loud, too much, too inconvenient for the shape of what you were building together. So you trimmed it. You filed the edges down. You made yourself easier to love by making yourself smaller. And you called it compromise. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire in the known world. He had absolute authority over millions of lives. And yet every single morning, Before the Senate, before the armies, before the weight of civilization landed on his desk, he sat alone and wrote to himself. Not for an audience, not for history, for the singular, unglamorous purpose of staying honest about who he was. He wrote in his journal what we now call meditations, words that were never meant to be read by anyone else. And in those pages, he returned obsessively to one question. Am I acting from my own values or from the need to be seen a certain way? That question will end you if you let it land properly. Because here is the Stoic revelation that Part 2 was building toward. Here is what was cracking the foundation long before the final conversation. The silent erosion of self-integrity, not dramatic betrayal, not a single catastrophic choice, but the slow, almost invisible process of orienting your inner life around external approval, around one person's approval specifically. Their moods became your weather, their silence became your emergency. Their happiness became the metric by which you measured your own worth on any given day. You became, without meaning to, a satellite, orbiting, dependent on the gravity of someone else's presence to know where you were in space. And when that gravity disappeared, you didn't just lose a person. You lost your coordinates. This is what nobody names. This is the specific architecture of heartbreak that feels different from sadness. It's the disorientation, the free float, the terrifying openness of waking up and not knowing who you're supposed to be today, because the person who reflected you back at yourself is gone. Marcus Aurelius had a word for the opposite of this state. He called it autarkeia, self-sufficiency. Not isolation, not coldness, not the performance of not needing anyone. The deep, quiet, unshakable capacity to be your own source of light. Think about how light actually works. A mirror can only reflect what's given to it. It produces nothing on its own. The moment the source disappears, the mirror goes dark. But a flame generates. A flame is its own origin. You can cover it, you can diminish it, but the source of the light exists inside the thing itself. You were built to be a flame, and somewhere along the way, you became a mirror. Here is the moment in this video where you need to pause and be brutally honest with yourself. Not about them, about you. How many of your daily emotions over the last months, maybe years, were actually responses to their state of being? How much of your joy was borrowed from their good mood? How much of your anxiety was generated by their distance? How often did you feel genuinely, independently, quietly okay without needing any signal from them at all? If the answer is uncomfortable, that's not indictment, that's information. Because Marcus Aurelius, who lost children, who fought wars he didn't choose, who governed people who wanted him dead, never once made his inner peace dependent on outcomes he couldn't control. Not because he didn't feel. He felt everything. His journals are full of grief and frustration and the particular exhaustion of caring deeply in a world that resists care. But he had a practice, a daily non-negotiable practice of returning to himself, of asking before sleep, before dawn, am I still here? Is the flame still mine? That practice is what the 8 rules in this video are built on. Not strategies for getting over someone faster. Not tricks for moving on. A genuine Stoic method of returning to the self that existed before the erosion began. And the first rule, the one that makes all the others possible, is the one most people actively resist. Because it asks you to do the one thing that feels most like losing. It asks you to go completely, deliberately, uncomfortably silent. Not forever. Not as punishment, but as the only real way to hear what's been trying to reach you through all the noise. What exactly does that silence require you to face? That's where we go next. The fastest way to destroy your own recovery is to try to recover quickly. Read that again. Because the entire modern grief industry, the self-help books, the 30-day healing challenges, the glow-up culture, the relentless pressure to be okay, to be better, to be visibly thriving before the wound has even closed, is built on a lie so comfortable that most people never question it. The lie is this: healing is linear, and speed is a virtue. It isn't, and it isn't. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism itself, lost everything in a single shipwreck. His entire cargo, his livelihood, his planned future. Gone in one afternoon, and what did he do? He didn't sprint toward recovery. He didn't optimize his grief. He walked into a bookshop in Athens, sat down and started reading philosophy. He let the season change at its own pace. And from that unhurried wreckage came an entire school of thought that has outlasted empires. So here now are the 8 Stoic rules, not in theory, in practice, with the specific honest instruction for what each one actually requires you to do starting today. Rule 1. Enter the silence voluntarily before it forces its way in. The silence that heals is not the silence of avoidance. It's not numbing out or going cold. It's the deliberate choice to stop performing your grief for an audience and start actually experiencing it privately. Delete the posts. Close the thread. Sit in a room with no phone for 20 minutes and feel the full, unfiltered weight of what happened. It will be uncomfortable in a way that surprises you. Do it anyway. This is where the work actually begins. Rule 2. Separate the pain from the story. There are 2 things happening inside you right now. The actual pain, the real embodied physical ache of loss. And the story you're telling about the pain. The story has villains and victims and alternate timelines. The story loops. The story metastasizes. The pain, by itself, is finite. Learn to feel the pain without narrating it, and you cut the suffering in half. Zeno called this prosocial attention without judgment. Watch the feeling. Don't explain it. Rule 3. Reclaim one daily practice that belongs only to you. Not for fitness. Not for productivity. Not to become someone who looks like they're healing. One practice: morning pages, a walk with no destination, 10 minutes of genuine stillness that you do for no audience. Not even yourself as an audience. Just the doing. This is how you begin rebuilding the internal structures that eroded, one beam at a time, every single day without exception. Rule 4. Stop asking why they left. Start asking who you were becoming. The question, why did this end, points outward. It keeps you in the story. The Stoic question points inward. What was this relationship asking me to ignore about myself? What parts of me went quiet to keep this alive? That inquiry is not self-blame. It is the opposite. It is the act of taking your own inner life seriously enough to examine it. Most people never do this. It is why most people repeat the same relationship in different bodies for decades. Rule 5. Treat your attention like currency and stop spending it on them. Every time you check the profile, reread the messages, or run the mental simulation of what they're doing right now, you are spending the most valuable resource you own on something that returns nothing. The Stoics called undisciplined attention the primary source of human suffering. Not loss, not circumstance. Where your attention goes, your energy follows. Right now your attention needs one address. Yourself. Redirect it again and again, without self-judgment. The redirection is the practice. Rule 6. Let the grief be seasonal, not permanent weather. Winter is not a malfunction. It is a necessary phase that makes spring structurally possible. The trees do not panic in November. They do not perform wellness to impress the forest. They go inward. They conserve. They let the dead things fall without mourning every leaf. You are allowed to be in winter. You are not allowed to build a home there. Feel the cold fully, but keep moving through it. Rule 7. Rebuild your self-narrative from the inside. Not the story others tell about you. Not the story the relationship wrote for you. Sit down literally, with pen and paper, and answer this. Who was I before I needed anyone's approval to feel real? Write until you find something true. It may take several sessions. That's fine. You are not looking for inspiration. You are looking for evidence. Evidence that the person worth recovering already exists. Rule 8. Refuse the identity of someone who was broken by this. This is the hardest rule, because victimhood in grief is seductive. It explains everything, it requires nothing. But the Stoics were violently clear on one point: you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do in the space after it happened. That space is open right now, wide open, and what you place inside it over the next weeks and months will define not just who you become, but what you are capable of offering every person who comes after. You are at the beginning of something, not the end. There is a Roman record, barely a footnote in history, of Marcus Aurelius sitting alone the night after burying his closest friend. No ceremony, no public mourning, no announcement of grief, just a man, an oil lamp, and a journal. What he wrote that night was not a eulogy, it was not a lament. It was a single question to himself, not why was he taken, not how do I continue, but this, what does this ask of me now? That question is the whole of Stoicism. And it is the whole of what this video has been building toward. You have spent most of this heartbreak asking the wrong questions. Not because you are weak, because you are human. The wrong questions feel urgent. They feel like investigation. They feel like if you just find the right answer, the pain will have a reason, and the reason will make it bearable. But the pain is already bearable. You are already bearing it. Right now, in this moment, the very fact that you are here, listening, still seeking, that is not the behavior of someone who is broken. That is the behavior of someone who is quietly, stubbornly, refusing to be defined by what happened to them. Seneca wrote, "Per asperat astra," through difficulty to the stars, not around it, not over it, through. The Stoics never promised a path that avoided suffering. They promised something better. A self so grounded, so honestly constructed, so genuinely yours that suffering could pass through you without taking up permanent residence. That is what the 8 rules build. Not armor, not distance, not the cold, performative indifference that people sometimes mistake for strength. A self that is genuinely, structurally okay. Not because life is painless, but because your identity no longer depends on life being painless. Think about where you were at the beginning of this video. The specific feeling that was sitting in your chest. The weight of it. The particular exhaustion of carrying something you didn't choose and couldn't put down. That weight is still real. But something has shifted. Not the circumstances, those haven't changed. What has shifted is the angle from which you are looking at them. And angle, in the Stoic tradition, is everything. Marcus Aurelius called it hypolepsis, the interpretation we place on events. The event itself is neutral. The meaning is always chosen. You are choosing a different meaning now. Not the meaning that says this broke you. Not the meaning that says you are less or unworthy or permanently marked by what one person decided about your future. But the meaning that the Stoics discovered in every furnace they were forced to walk through. This is the making of something. Here is what the next 30 days can look like if you apply what you have learned. Not a dramatic transformation, not a highlight reel, something quieter and more durable than that. Mornings where you sit for 10 minutes before reaching for your phone and you genuinely notice, that the first thought isn't about them. Afternoons where you make a decision based entirely on what you want, with no reference to anyone else's opinion of it. Evenings where the silence doesn't feel like absence anymore, where it starts to feel, slowly, tentatively, like space. Space that belongs to you. Space where something new can actually grow, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped filling every quiet moment with noise designed to avoid the very healing that was waiting there. That is the season turning. That is winter doing exactly what winter is supposed to do. Not punishment, preparation. And spring is not a destination you arrive at when the grief is officially over. It arrives in increments. A morning where you laugh and mean it. A week where the profile goes unchecked. A moment where you catch yourself thinking about the future, your future. The one that belongs only to you, and feel something that isn't dread. Something closer to curiosity. Something that feels, against all logic, like the beginning of wanting to be alive again. Marcus Aurelius did not finish his journals. They were never meant to be finished. They were a practice daily, humble, honest, of returning to himself. Every single day. For the rest of his life. That is the invitation this video leaves you with. Not a conclusion. A practice. Return to yourself today. And tomorrow. And the day after that. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just honestly. You are not what was done to you. You are what you choose to build in the silence after. And the building has already begun. If this reached something real in you today, if even one sentence shifted something that needed to shift, share this with someone you know who is quietly carrying a weight they haven't spoken about. Not because they need advice, because they need to know they are not alone in the ruins. That is what Stoic Origin exists to do. Not inspiration content, not motivational noise, genuine philosophy, built for people who are serious about understanding themselves. If that is you, subscribe. Like this video, because the next one goes deeper. The work continues, so do you.